Good morning, I'm Verity Way-Smith from Monsoon Communications. Thank you for participating in Genetic Signature's Investor Presentation. Joining us today is Genetic Signature's CEO, John Melky, and CFO, Peter Manley, who will be delivering the company update. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the Genetic Signature's website. You may also submit questions using the Q&A chat function. I'll now hand over to John to begin the presentation.
Thanks so much, Verity. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning for our investor presentation. I think I'll launch straight into our summary. We are an established company. We were listed 6.5 years ago. However, we are the company that's now 20 years old. We are uniquely focused on the commercialization of our very unique 3-base technology and its application to the rapid and accurate detection of infectious diseases. So these are the microorganisms that make us sick, some of which have quite high mortality rates. So this technology was designed in an effort to better detect these infections, ultimately saving lives. So our 3-base technology allows us to design, to develop, manufacture, sell support kits to pathology labs who are our customers. They use genetic signatures kits on patient samples in order to understand if an infection is present or not. So the kits that we sell are available in all major markets. We've been selling them for the last 10 years with year-on-year growth during that time. We just achieved record sales revenue, both in the first quarter of this financial year, where we announced just this morning, record revenues of 12.4 million. Our best ever quarter to date. Similarly, the year that just closed was also a record with 28 million in sales, an increase of more than 2.5 times over the prior year. We've achieved a 4-year CAGR of 93% with labs around the world using our tests every day and many times each day. The sales model is very straightforward. We sell our kits to testing laboratories, they're mid to high throughput facilities, hospital laboratories, private pathology suppliers, who in turn use our kits on patient material that come into the lab every day. They pay us on standard terms, 30-day terms. So for genetic signatures, time from sale to cash is pretty quick. And the testing lab themselves, our customers, are generally reimbursed through government subsidies for every test that they perform. So these tests, kit sales, they've led to genetic signatures being profitable. We had 33 million in cash and no debt. The quarter just reported had a positive cash flow of almost 3 million. We have a number of kits with regulatory registrations in multiple jurisdictions and more kits coming through the development and commercialization pathways. We now have a footprint in our target markets of Europe and the US, and we are building off our home-based success here in Australia. We've had many, many repeat sales, and it's with that confidence that I can say that 3-base is now a trusted and proven technology. So on the next slide, I just want to highlight the type of 3-base tests that we make. These tests that we produce are known as syndromic panels or syndromic screening, which allows labs to test for a really large number, a broad number of clinically relevant pathogens, which are based on patient symptoms. So respiratory, we're familiar with at the moment. You could have a sore throat or a runny nose, but we know that could be any number of infections. It could be influenza, rhinovirus, RSV, SARS-CoV-2. But our tests are able to look for all of these and more in just the one patient sample, in effectively the one test. The tests are molecular, they're PCR-based tests, or they're the kind of tests that directly detect genetic information. And these are considered the gold standard diagnostic test for infectious diseases. But what's unique to genetic signatures is our 3-base technology. And this is the technology that converts all of the cDNA letters to a T letter. But the reason we do that is just to remove the variability that happens between strains. I usually use influenza as an example because we've all heard of bird flu or swine flu or pandemic flu. They're all influenza, but they are slightly different at the genetic level. And so 3-base technology allows us to better detect all of these subtypes. But really further to this, the real 3-base is resistant to most of the naturally occurring mutations. that C to T letter change that we do happens in nature all the time. And it happens spontaneously. So a lot of the mutations that other molecular diagnostic companies have to deal with are invisible to us. And that's why we can detect all of the main strains, including SARS-CoV-2, where alpha, beta, gamma, delta, they are, of all the published sequences, 99% are a perfect match to our 3-base technology. On the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the kits that we sell, but you can also see the genetic signatures branded instruments, which are on the bottom. These are important. I will come back to it a number of times during the talk, but they do cover low, medium, high throughput scenarios. And you've heard possibly us refer to a printer and cartridge model. These are the printer. The instruments are the printer in that printer and cartridge model. And importantly, and this really is very important, genetic signatures has quadrupled the number of these instruments in the field during the last 18 months. These instruments are revenue generating, and we now have a much larger install base given the progress that we've made over the last 18 months. Another really important point I want to make here is that we've worked really hard to make sure all of our tests work in exactly the same way, regardless of which test is being used. So once we release new tests, customers can easily integrate the new tests into their existing workflows, as well as opening doors to new customers. So you can see in that printer and cartridge type model, our tests are the consumable which they're using on their instruments, and they're often genetic signatures branded instruments. Our increasing revenue certainly reflects the success of this strategy, and I will ask Peter Manley now to take us through our financial summary.
Thanks very much, John. Look, it's always a pleasure to present figures like this. You can see from the graph there on the left that we've had a very good quarter. We released those results this morning, 12.4 million, which is a record for us. It's 129% growth on the previous quarter, the fourth quarter of 2021, and also an 18% growth on the prior corresponding period, which was our previous record. The revenue has been generated from both the SARS-CoV-2 tests, particularly with the surge testing in Australia. But pleasingly, we've also seen the enteric testing for gastroenteritis coming back to more normal levels that we were experiencing pre-pandemic. We have generated almost all those sales are this quarter from reagent sales as well. John was talking about the placement of instruments. We do occasionally sell instruments to customers, and we did some small number of sales this quarter, but the vast majority is the cartridge model, not the printer side of things. We have got many instruments out there, as John has mentioned, and this is now giving us the opportunity to move that other tests into those same customers, and also to interest new customers in those tests. And we hope to see from that that mix of sales start to change from COVID, which has been beneficial to us, but not our sole source of income. And we are now seeing, as we mentioned in our announcement this morning, that we've made sales now to our first customer for enteric in the UK, and we have other sites around the world who are now trialling these tests as well. The next slide gives us a picture of our cash flow. We're very proud that we're able to generate positive cash. It's helped bolster our cash balance up now to $33 million, which gives us plenty of cash to reinvest in the business with growth in people overseas, also for a project that we're very keen to get out there as quickly as possible is the instrument development, which John will talk about later. Receipts from customers, of course, was 10.3 million, but we also have increased our trade receivables balance And as John mentioned, with good collection rates being around that 30 days roughly for receipt, we will see that 8.1 million come in during this quarter. We have talked in the past about our inventory levels. They did grow in 2021 so that we had supply to respond to our customers' needs, and we're very proud to say that we did not miss a delivery to our customers. We are seeing that inventory now reducing as we use it, and we're in a good position where we have adequate stock to meet any demand that comes through. We are seeing some increased costs, obviously, with the research and development, with the new projects, and with staffing as we grow the teams overseas so that they can meet demand and promote our products. So John, I'll hand back to you regarding our products.
Thanks so much, Peter, for highlighting that revenue growth. It's important to point out that revenue and the revenue growth has primarily been from our two most mature products, which is not unexpected. Certainly those that detect respiratory infections, but also enteric or gastrointestinal disease. But that's the power of this slide, where you can see that we have many more products that are in development, and that is important from a revenue point of view. We know that respiratory, fueled by the pandemic, gastroenteritis is our most mature product, but we have 7 additional products, either with some regulatory registrations or that are coming through the development pathway. Remembering that these tests all work in exactly the same way and are compatible with instruments that are already in the field. And that's why the entire Genetic Signatures team is excited to complete development and commercialize these additional products. It's important to reiterate, these are full panels. Each one of these looks for 10 or 15 or 20 microorganisms that may be present in the one patient sample. We're familiar, obviously, with respiratory given the current conditions, but we know that there are many other targets that could cause the same symptoms. So our respiratory kit, as an example, detects 14 types of infection in addition to SARS-CoV-2. So that person who has the symptoms, sore throat, runny nose, we are able to tell them it's influenza or rhino or RSV or a mild corona or SARS-CoV-2. So effectively looking for all of them in the one patient sample in effectively the one test. That respiratory kit has regulatory approvals in Europe and Australia, and this again is why we're so excited about our future. These are kits that are ready and available as we transition out of the pandemic, which focused on detecting only SARS-CoV-2, transitioning back to a normal situation where multiple infections can cause the same symptoms. The next slide will focus a little more on that, because we shifted our focus many months back to our business post-COVID. Prior to the pandemic, we'd completed a capital raise, we're gearing up with direct sales efforts into Europe and the US. We already had assays for mild coronaviruses that were being used every day in customer labs. So it was a very easy pivot for us to make a new assay for SARS-CoV-2. And it led to new customers coming on board, the quadrupling of the instruments that we have in the field, all of which resulted in those increased sales and increased revenue. So it's these customers that Genetic Signatures is now targeting with the other approved tests that we already had before the pandemic. The teams are in place. They're actively pursuing all of these opportunities, including, as Peter mentioned, non-respiratory targets such as enteric, gastrointestinal targets. As Pete said, we have received a purchase order for our enteric range of products out of the UK. We weren't expecting that 12 months ago when they were completely focused on getting through the testing required during the pandemic. I do want to highlight a recent improvement that's come out of R&D, and this is a new, faster protocol. And this has been validated. It's being used by customers already. The feedback has been terrific. We've effectively decreased the time to result by 1.5 to 2 hours. We are now in the process of converting all of our assays to this faster protocol because it further increases throughput and increases the throughput per instrument. I now want to turn to our strategy of replicating our success in Europe and the US. And we have made good inroads into Europe over the last 12 months, and they were often very difficult circumstances. We are direct and have direct sales and support in the UK and also Germany. They've developed a good pipeline of opportunities. We have distributors in other key countries, European countries, and we have a number of sites that are using us for COVID screening. And we have the other kits which have CE-IVD mark, including gastroenteritis, sexually transmitted infections, or antibiotic-resistant bacterial detection. We're free to market those in Europe. As Pete mentioned, we did just complete a European trial of our enteric product, which resulted in a PO, but we have more trials underway and more coming in the months ahead. The US is the largest international market. 40% of testing revenue or testing is being done in the US. We have a direct team in the US. It covers off sales support, and we have a distributor in Canada. We have market entry into the US with our SARS-CoV-2 detection kit, but I am most excited by our entry preparation for our first FDA cleared product, which is for the detection of enteric protozoans. And that's where we're aspiring to win up to 40% market share in the next 3 to 5 years. I will come back to that in a moment. Australia is our home base. It's where we are direct with sales and support. We manufacture all of our product. We have excellent penetration into New South Wales and Victoria, and recently secured a new lab in Queensland. It is significant. Australia is one of the most competitive, lean, efficient markets in terms of IVD testing. Certainly very well respected as being on the forefront of molecular testing. So I said I'll come back to it on the next slide. I will show you the potential of an enteric protozoan product in the US following FDA clearance. And just to walk you through those assumptions, because we do believe that our product will displace traditional testing for parasite detection, which is looking down a microscope trying to identify protozoan targets and protozoan cysts. Now we know that there are roughly 5.5 million of these tests each year, and we're aspiring to win 40% of this market over the next 5 years. We're still to set pricing, but if you look at the table on the bottom left, you can see what sales might look like with 20% up to 40% of market share, with sales of $20 to $40, which I think is reasonably conservative, knowing that there's a rebate that's over $200. So this single product in the US could generate $22 to $88 million US dollars per annum in revenue. And it's this reason that we are so excited to finish our trials and get our FDA application in. It's in the clinical trial stage, and the entire team is working to get through it as quickly as possible. The next slide will just give you a snapshot of the investment summary. We currently have 143 million shares on offer. Our market cap is around 214 million. Fairly liquid, 2.2 million shares turned over on average each month. And taking into account our cash, our enterprise value is at 181 million. In terms of the register, we're very proud of the institutional support that we have. Our biggest investor is Asia Union. This is Chris Abbott's private company of Maple Brown Abbott, who was a founder of the company and supported us 15 years prior to listing. And we're obviously very happy to have Perennial and Fidelity on the register. So on the next slide, I'll just take you through our multiple growth opportunities that are in front of us. We are really focused on those 3 things that I've described. It's continuing to secure those long-term customer contracts. Remember, these are high value, high throughput contracts. We excel in customer service. We delight our customers, and they've acted as references to win new customers. We're focused on upselling to the new customers we've gained over the last 18 months. Remembering our tests work in exactly the same way, regardless of the test. So existing customers can easily add in new product, especially as we already have regulatory registrations in multiple jurisdictions. Finally, we are focused on developing and commercializing our new products. I've mentioned the enteric protozoan kit for submission to the FDA, as well as advancing our newly announced kits. These include measles, mumps, and rubella, and tick-borne diseases, and dermatophytes, which are a fungal infection. But we also announced to the market recently, we are working on a next generation. It's a 3-base specific sample to result instrument, which we believe will be a game changer. The users simply load a patient specimen into the instrument and it does the rest, from purification to PCR amplification and reporting the results. And we are confident this will give us access to new market segments, as will the new products that we're developing. I think I'll conclude on the next slide by summarizing the investment opportunity in genetic signatures. Firstly, it's our revenue growth. We have achieved our maiden full year profit for the last financial year, and we are cash flow positive in the current quarter. In the first quarter of the current year, which we just announced. There remain significant market opportunities for genetic signatures, particularly in the US and Europe, which combined account for over 70% of the world testing market. We have those new products coming through the development pathways. We're working on the next generation instrument that we do believe will be a game changer for high throughput syndromic testing. And finally, we have a proven business model. We have increased recognition in the bigger international markets, and we have a unique technology. So I'm happy to pause there for any questions that any viewers may have.
Well, John, there've been a couple of questions submitted, so I will read those out, and we will share the responses. So initially, we have a question here: has there been any progress on the submission to the FDA regarding enteric protozoan, which I think we have in part covered in the presentation, but perhaps you could expand on that, John.
Yeah, so the FDA for enteric protozoan. Yep. So we're in the middle of the clinical trials. It's required. We are required to get to 1,500 patient samples. So the trial is dependent on patient recruitment rates. So these have been lower due to COVID. And our goal is to have all of the patient samples collected and tested by the year end. So after that, we're able to resolve discrepancies and finally lodge with the FDA.
Okay. A follow-on question from that was the status of the second and third FDA sites, but I think you've probably covered that off.
They're underway.
Yep. There was a question regarding the sexually transmitted infection kit. Can you provide some information on why the certification of the STI kit in Australia has been delayed so much?
It's a good question. Yeah, we remain in contact with the TGA regarding the STI application. It was lodged 12 months ago. They have prioritised COVID testing for review, and they're particularly focused at the moment on rapid antigen point of care tests. So other kinds of tests have been neglected. It's affecting the entire industry. We ourselves are represented by Pathology Technology Australia, which we are a member of, and they have certainly represented us to the Department of Health, considering the time that it's taking to review applications. So we do know that the TGA is responding. They have increased their team from 5 to 18, but the new recruits need training, obviously. So it's going to take some time for the increased throughput to come through, but we're certainly lobbying for more transparency around that. And the PTA themselves have recently written to the TGA and Minister Hunt to seek explanation and improvement.
Thanks, John. Another question which actually relates to the enteric order in the UK. Someone has asked who the nature of that customer, whether it was a pathology lab or hospital, and also what the quantum is of that order. I think I can probably answer that one. It is a hospital that has placed that order. We don't generally comment on the size of orders. That we treat that as commercial in confidence. It's not, if it was huge, in the $1 million range, we'd certainly have to announce it. But otherwise, we'll keep that to ourselves. The next question relates to M&A activity, which was referred to in one of our previous announcements, and just whether there's been any more interest in the market generally, and has Genetic Signatures had any interest expressed?
Well, I think it's fair to say we don't comment on any M&A activity, and I guess expectations are that any offer that was made, we would have to consider it, but importantly, we'd have to put it in front of shareholders who ultimately decide if an offer is acceptable or not.
Okay. A technical question, I'll absolutely defer this one to John. Someone asked, how have you managed to reduce testing time so significantly?
It's a great question. It is on the PCR side, so it's on the amplification side. There are two things that we've done. The first is just to reduce that PCR time. So we were able to make use of faster programs and faster profiles, which really reduced the amount of time taken to generate the actual real-time PCR results. We have also made improvements on the sample processing side on the bigger instruments, which can process 188 patient samples, and we've managed to reduce timing there through some programming tweaks that we've introduced over the last couple of months.
And further to that, someone has asked, have competitors managed to reduce their time to result?
I mean, generally molecular tests are reasonably quick anyway. There are some tests that can generate tests in an hour, but they tend to do them one at a time, or maybe a handful of tests at a time. The time savings that I'm talking about apply to when we're doing 188 patient samples in one run. It also applies when we're looking for SARS-CoV-2 on its own, or also doing full panel screening. So it's quite different that we've been able to preserve the strength of 3-base, the wide array of targets that we detect, yet reduce the time it takes for the lab to generate those results.
I'll combine a couple of questions here, John, because they are kind of linked. One is our view on rapid antigen testing and what impact that will have on the use of PCR tests. And in line with that, and slightly linked, is also thoughts on the opening of international borders and what that will mean for PCR testing.
Yeah. So molecular PCR tests, the kind that we make, are still considered the gold standard. I think the question was about rapid antigen testing. So any positives from a rapid antigen test generally needs to be confirmed via PCR, the gold standard. They do have a false positive rate. They equally have a false negative rate. If I look at Australia, the rapid antigen tests have just been registered, but then they have to be used with a professional. They will move to home testing, but they won't be reimbursed by Medicare. So I think that will create some resistance to their take-up. But they also take about 15 minutes per single sample. So it's not something that's going to affect like the large labs are not going to, certainly not going to adopt these. And anything that has large volumes, rapid testing is not appropriate. In terms of the borders opening up, it's predicted that obviously with an influx of people, we will see an increase in infection rates. I believe we will see an increase in SARS-CoV-2, but I also believe we're going to see an increase in all of the other infections, which have vastly reduced during the time that we had our borders closed. Influenza, for example, I believe, and experts are predicting that once the borders open, it will be reintroduced. And so there will always be high-level respiratory testing. I don't think we can avoid that.
Fairly broad question, this one, John, but I think it's one we're all interested in. What do you see as your major challenges for the coming year, and how do you intend to meet them?
The challenge, I mean, our strategy, as I outlined, is pretty clear. We've put a lot of mitigation in place with overseas warehouses, and we are really focused on transitioning our existing customers to using more of our tests. So there are challenges around timing. If there are outbreaks of SARS-CoV-2 overseas, it may delay that transition. So really, I think the challenge comes down to timing. I've no doubt that the testing regimes will transition back to the way they were pre-pandemic, albeit possibly with a higher level of testing as people have become used to feeling sick and going and getting a test and getting a result. So really, I think we've put everything in place that we can, and it's really just about that timing. But we're very active. All of our overseas teams are very active and stay in very close contact with our customer labs and potential customers.
I think, John, sort of one last question, so we can allow people to get back to their desks and get on with their day. This question relates to cash, and what has been asked is, apart from test development and international sales, how else can you use the significant cash balance that we have?
Yeah, that's a fair question. We have funds on hand, as we've outlined, but this is all being invested in growth at this stage. So I think I highlighted that in my presentation. And if you go back to the capital raise that we did at 2019, a couple of those initiatives were effectively put on hold. So we have an instrument that we're developing. We have another 3 assays that we wish to put through the FDA, which are expensive trials. But really, ultimately, we are investing in growth.
Yep.
All right, thanks, John and Peter. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you again for joining us for the investor presentation.